Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Ryan Basulto, and we are here to talk about a lot of great things. We are going to talk about the NFL and how they just dropped a new Week 17 schedule. All teams in the NFL are now required to play a Week 17 game. This is the first time since the 60s that this has happened. Anything has happened with the game changes or more like the number of games played in a season. And we're going to talk about all those games and their fantasy implications because I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of good matchups like Packers Chiefs, Steelers Seahawks, Raiders Bears, Giants Dolphins, maybe the Giants. You know, just got all these new pieces. They added Adoree Jackson on the defensive end. They had a Kenny Galladay on the offensive end. But what about the Dolphins? They had one of the top 5 fantasy defenses, along with Tua throwing to now not only Devontae Parker, who if he gets hurt, they don't have to worry about. Preston Williams, not only him, but Will Fuller, the old boy from the Texans. And I don't think the Texans, we're going to talk about them, but I'm not too crazy about them at all right now. Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We are going to talk about every single game that has just been added to the new NFL schedule. We're going to break them down game by game, and we're going to go over all the fantasy options. We're going to go over what I like. We're going to break down where the ranking was. Let's see how these receivers would fare against these DBs, and maybe how this running back like Derrick Henry goes against, I forgot who the Titans play. Titans play one of these teams, but whoever he's going against on defense, they are going to match up against each other and see what it means in fantasy and if you're going to be confident, at least in this week. This fantasy podcast is very useful because when all these matchups finally come, you at least know, and this will be a little cheat sheet on everything that has happened. Also, some of the teams are kind of wild cards. The Jets, the Niners, the Jaguars, they're all going to add a new quarterback in the draft. So, we also do not know how those quarterbacks will fare with these receivers, if they will help or hurt any of these matchups. But we're going to start off with one of the first games. Packers at Chiefs. Remember, these games are not dated yet, so you can't say, oh, well, they're going to play, Packers Chiefs are playing week 5, week 10. They are just added to that team schedule. The dates and all the games that are going to be played will be released at another time, but we're going to look at the fantasy perspective in all of these games. So let's go. We're going to start off with Packers Chiefs, the number 1 fantasy offense in 2020 versus the number 1 offense in the actual NFL. We don't care about that, though. We care about the number 1 fantasy offense. And the number 1 receiver on the Packers is Davante Adams, and we are really worried about him versus that Chiefs secondary. Davante Adams is a wide receiver 1, had 115 catches for 1,378 yards. He was number 1 in touchdowns. He was 4th in receiving yards in the NFL, and he had 62 touchdowns in his whole career, in his 8-year career. This guy has not even played that long, and he is a stud. He got 18 touchdowns this year, which was obviously number 1 in the NFL. Davante Adams against his Chiefs secondary seems very interesting just for the simple fact that the Chiefs aren't a great secondary. Their secondary is still ranked, 18th on Pro Football Focus. But they mix between man and zone. And that's at least good different looks because that could catch a quarterback off, say, in the Super Bowl. Didn't work this Super Bowl. But if, say, you go for man and go to zone, at least you know that you're keeping the offense on edge the whole time. But you can't do that with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers does not miss when he hits his Devontae Adams. Tyrann Mathieu in the secondary is probably the best corner or the best DB out of the Chiefs secondary. He dropped 7 interceptions, tied for 6 in the he tied for most in the NFL with 7 interceptions. So, and he's your best DB. So, he has an 81.5, coverage grade, which is top 20 in the NFL, which is good. But, Devontae Adams isn't the only guy on the team. Now you have to focus on Robert Tonyan, who's going to guard Robert Tonyan. And then who's going to worry about A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones in the backfield. And Aaron Rodgers just doesn't miss. Like I said, this guy's first in passing touchdowns, MVP, and the big stat, he's only had 5 picks. Him and Patrick Mahomes, which is going to be a crazy battle, are both elite scramblers, according to Pro Football Focus. But believe it or not, Aaron Rodgers actually had more rushing touchdowns than Patrick Mahomes last year. But Patrick Mahomes, he's number 2 in passing yards, and he still threw for over 40 touchdowns. He ranked 4th in touchdowns, not a typical Patrick Mahomes year, but this guy's a stud. He has the likes of Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. Patrick Mahomes threw for 4,700 yards, 38 touchdowns. Sorry, I didn't mean over 40 touchdowns. 38 touchdowns, almost 40, and only 6 picks. So are a lot of mistakes even going to be made in this game? Can you just rely that this game is going to be a complete shootout? Because the Packers secondary is number 2, by the way, according to Pro Football Focus, which is pretty high. Because they have J.R. Alexander and Adrian Amos, who is the number 1 Pro Football Focused ranked safety. J.R. Alexander, obviously the number 2 ranked corner out of in the NFL. But that combo right there is enough to bracket and guard Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce if Patrick Mahomes were to make mistakes. But Patrick Mahomes doesn't make mistakes. Like I said, he only had 6 interceptions last year. Travis Kelce was still the number 1 tight end. 105 receptions, 1,400 yards, 11 touchdowns. Then he's got the guy who scored 2nd in receiving touchdowns, Tyreek Hill, 87 catches, 1,276 yards, and 15 touchdowns. He ranked 3rd in fantasy receivers with 317 points. Guy's an absolute stud, and you can't just leave out Clyde Edwards-Helaire either. Clyde Edwards-Helaire in that backfield rushed 181 times for 803 yards. Yes, that wasn't stellar, and only 4 touchdowns, but we already know what my method is. Patrick Mahomes, that's his boy. He just got another year acclimated to the playbook. Le'Veon Bell, they realize he's not a thing anymore. Andy Reid likes to have a little bit of a running back by committee. Not really. He just likes maybe the lead running back to get 20 carries, the backup running back to get 10. That's just how he kind of likes to operate. But this Chiefs offense is going to be the number 1 scoring offense again next year. So might as well just pick them all. Might as well have every single one of these guys playing. If any one of these guys are playing against the Packers, who ranked below 25th in the NFL in rushing yards allowed, the Packers were awful. Not even below 25. They were below 30th in the NFL, ranked at 30. Out of 32 teams in rushing points allowed to fantasy running backs. So, we like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Travis Kelce is going against the weakest part of the Packers, their linebacking core. Yes, they have Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith. They have those 2 guys, but they're like converted linebackers / mainly rushers, like a LT or a Sean Merriman off the edge, if you guys remember those 2 old guys. But they don't really have the best linebacking core when it comes to pass coverage, and that's why their rushing defense stinks, and they won't be able to guard Travis Kelce, or they won't be able to stop the rush. So Patrick Mahomes knows that. Just know if you have Patrick Mahomes that game, let it fly. Patrick Mahomes, even if he's going against J.R. Alexander and Adrian Amos, 2 of the best corners, along with young Darnell Savage, who's one of the best slot corners in the NFL. Pro Football Focus ranked him top 10. Darnell Savage is a good secondary guy too, but Patrick Mahomes, ultimately, you have to let him sling rock. There's just no other way. And you know that he's going to rush all over this defense. It's not even close. But the problem is the Packers also have allowed the least sacks. So that means no one's going to get to Aaron Rodgers, so he's not going to make many mistakes. So he's going to throw it to Davante Adams most of the time, his number one boy. Aaron Rodgers is elite. And Patrick Mahomes is elite. So I just think in the end, you start everyone in that game. Every single big head. Oh, I didn't even mention Aaron Jones. Rushed for 1,100 yards last year, 9 touchdowns. A.J. Dillon starts to get acclimated a little more into the offense. So it's going to be a slow pushing. But Aaron Jones is a fly for that game if it's an early game of the year. Not if it's just a game in the morning, not an early type of game. Oh, Aaron Jones is a morning person. So when it's in the morning, he's very good. But once it becomes nighttime, he's over it. He's tired. He's sleepy. And that's April Fool's stuff for you. April Fool's, if anyone actually celebrates that holiday. Let's go into the next matchup. Bears versus the Oakland Raiders. Very interesting. The Bears' main matchup is going to be Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake versus that defense. The defense was ranked 17th in fantasy points. They only allowed 358 points allowed. They had 10 interceptions, 8 fumble recoveries, and 2 touchdowns. Not really a playmaking bunch, but they did what they had to do. They have to go against Josh Jacobs, though. Josh Jacobs, who rushed for 1,000 yards, 1,065 to be exact, and 12 touchdowns on 273 carries. They're going to churn him. They're going to churn him the whole year. Best game he had was against the Panthers last year. He had 35 fantasy points, 3 touchdowns, 93 yards rushing. Another great game against the Broncos. He had another great game against the Chargers, and another great game against the Broncos, and then the Chiefs. What I noticed is he's not doing good against these heavy rush defenses. So the Saints only allowed 12. He only got 12 fantasy points. Then we got the Patriots. He got 9 fantasy points. The Bills, 9 fantasy points. The Browns, 12. The Bucks, 5. The Colts, 9. This guy is not doing good against real rushing defenses. And the problem is the Bears are a pretty good rush defense. And it's not to say, at least they're top 10 in rush yards allowed. They are, where are those Bears? The Bears. They actually are 2. They're second in rushing touchdowns allowed. I was just looking for them all over the place. They're the 12th ranked defense. Only 7 rushing touchdowns allowed. But they have Kenyon Drake now, who's a good pass catching back, a good change of pace back. He still had 230 yards. They have 2 running backs who are capable of having over 230 carries. With 955 yards, they both rushed in the double digits of touchdowns with 12 and 10 respectively, 10 going to Kenyon. And I think that duo is too much for the Bears to stop. I think that Josh Jacobs, is good, but Kenyon Drake on the other side of him now? And then let's talk, not even that running back. It's going to be a whole running back showdown because I would start Kenyon Drake and Josh Jacobs this game just because I think Josh Jacobs might not get the most yards. I think Kenyon Drake will benefit more. Josh Jacobs will get the 10 fantasy points. Kenyon Drake will get the 15 to 20 because they're going to be blitzing on Derek Carr. They're going to be making sure they attack the rusher a lot. And by doing that, they're going to have to dump off the ball to, what do you say? What is his name? Josh Jacobs. Not Josh Jacobs. Kenyon Drake. They're going to have to dump the ball to Kenyon Drake. The Bears are they're a relentless bunch. They really are. So I think that they're going to, do good, but mainly stop Josh Jacobs more in this fight. But Dave Montgomery, the Raiders don't have the best rush defense in the world. They rank 29th in rush defense. They're awful. They rank 29th in, oh my goodness. The Raiders just allow absolutely everything to happen. In rush yards, they allow the 24th most rush yards. They allowed, the 14th most rushing touchdowns. The Raiders are going to give up a game to David Montgomery. David Montgomery, who rushed for 1,070 yards and 8 touchdowns last year and finished as the 4th ranked running back in all of football. Yes, the 4th ranked running back. David Montgomery, who in one of my drafts, I drafted him with the last pick because no one wanted him. I was like, why don't you want him? I'll just get him on the flyer. David Montgomery started picking it up towards the end of the year, which is the scary part. 11 rushes. Oh, let's start from week 12 against the Green Bay Packers. You have a terrible rush defense, as I just said before. 11 rushes, 103 yards, 25 fantasy points. Then we go to the Lions, who he's going to play again. 17 rushes, 72 yards, 2 touchdowns, 26 fantasy points. Then he has 24 fantasy points, 28 fantasy points, 19 and 27. When he finishes on the year with the Packers, again with 27 fantasy points. This guy's an absolute stud. He's going to go through the air and the ground on the Raiders. Not only do the Raiders have one of the worst pass rush defenses, but they have one of the worst pass defenses as well. They rank 26th in pass yards allowed, 24th in pass attempts, 19th in pass completions, 16th in passing touchdowns. They're 29th in sacks. They don't get to the quarterback. They're 23rd in interceptions. They're 30th in turnovers. Only 2 more teams have less turnovers than them, and that's the Texans and the Lions. They don't make plays. So that means Allen Robinson, who had 102 catches for 1,250 yards and 6 touchdowns last year, ranked 9th in fantasy. He is going to go off against the Raiders. I know it. I just know it. And Cole Kmet, I believe in him too. He was a rookie last year out of Notre Dame. This is going to be his second year. He's going to acclimate himself more in this offense. He had 28 catches for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns this year. I see him doubling all those stats, getting at least 60 catches, 600 yards, and 5 touchdowns next year. Watch out for Cole Kmet being a top 20 fantasy tight end. He's on the Bears. He'll be a good waiver. Derek Carr is not going to have a good game. Like I said, the Bears like to get to the quarterback. They really do. They rank in the top 12 in getting to the quarterback. They rank in the top 10 when it comes to passing yards allowed. Derek Carr didn't have a stellar year, the 13th ranked fantasy quarterback last year with 4,100 yards, 27 touchdowns. Still threw 9 picks and had 8 fumbles. So that means he still had 17 turnovers. Can't trust this guy with the ball. Andy Dalton, by the way. He's not going to have a great game, but like I said, the Raiders are 29th in sacks. So if they're 29th in sacks, then that means Andy Dalton shouldn't be that rushed. And they haven't added anyone besides Yannick Ngakoue that's really caught my eye. We'll see how they do in the draft. Remember, everything is dependent on the draft. But as it is now, Andy Dalton, stay away from him. But just know Allen Robinson and David Montgomery and Cole Kmet should be fine. They should all score a touchdown in this game. Henry Ruggs shouldn't have that good of a game on the Bears. The Bears are going to focus in on him. He's the best receiver on the Bears. They just added Willie Snead. I see Willie Snead getting a late touchdown, but Darren Waller is probably the guy you just want to trust, even though that linebacking core is great, which is why I'd be uncomfortable with Darren Waller. I'd be like, oh, well, Darren Waller is probably the 3rd-ranked tight end, going to give me anywhere from 6 to 12 fantasy points in PPR. I'm not counting on him being a touchdown machine because he doesn't score touchdowns that often. Just be wary of Darren Waller and don't set your expectations too high. Let's go on to a game that I think is just kind of a waste of time. Because we have to talk about it. The Lions versus the Denver Broncos. The 22-ranked fantasy defense in the Denver Broncos are going against Jared Goff, the 19th-ranked quarterback on the Rams last year, but now he's on the Lions. But I wouldn't start Jared Goff this game. It's just a waste of time to try to start Jared Goff. They just added Ronald Darby on the Broncos. They added Kendall Fuller, which was one of the good cornerbacks of the Chicago Bears. Then they re-signed Justin Simmons to a long-term deal, who's the Pro Football Focus ranked number 1 safety. Then they added Kareem Jackson back, and they still have Von Miller, who they restructured his contract, Bradley Chubb, and they just have a bunch of guys on defense. They have Amir Johnson. Like, come on. The Broncos defense is going to ball this. I think they would destroy the Lions in a matchup. DeAndre Swift, I like in this matchup, but not too much. The Lions ranked fantasy defense as 32nd. So let's focus in on the people I would start in this game. Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick is Drew Lock's flyer guy, and I feel like he's going to have another good year this year. He ranked 43 in receivers, yes, in fantasy football, but he had 51 catches, 742 yards, 6 touchdowns. He got it on at the end of the year, and Noah Fant, even though he had a couple of quarterbacks this year, he's still ranked top 10 in fantasy football, who I have a good feeling about. He ranked 9th out of tight ends, 62 catches, 673 yards. We want more touchdowns, but I think him and TJ Hawkinson, who ranked 5th in tight ends with 67 catches and 723 yards and 6 touchdowns, are going to do good. They are going to be the ones you'd want to start this game, along with Melvin Gordon. The Lions' rush defense is atrocious. It's 28th in rush yards allowed, 29th in rush attempts, so that just tells you that everyone wants to run on them because Melvin Gordon's a good running back. He still rushed for 986 yards and 9 touchdowns. He got that DUI. He was getting into the groove of things. They're more of a pass defense, kind of, than a rush defense, but they allowed the most rushing touchdowns too. And if Melvin Gordon's going to find the end zone, he's going to find the end zone on them. I'm confident in that one. Melvin Gordon, Hawk, Noah Fant, only guys I trust. And that Broncos defense, because next year I have high hopes for them. Now we got the Jaguars going up against the Atlanta Falcons. The Jaguars are a good team, but James Robinson is the guy we're going to focus in on that terrible Atlanta Falcons defense. But the only thing the Atlanta Falcons are good for are nothing. Nothing at all, because they're only good at stopping the rush. They've allowed the 4th least, the 13th least rushing touchdowns, the 2nd in rushing attempts, and in rush yards, they've only allowed the 5th most rush yards in the NFL. So they're top in the NFL in rush. Their pass is awful. They're 32nd in passing touchdowns, 32nd in passing yards, 31 in pass attempts. So you're just throwing the ball on them. James Robinson shouldn't have that great of a game, especially since they changed Dan Quinn, so the defense is all switched up. James Robinson did rush for 1,070 yards and 7 touchdowns last year, but let's temper that game. I feel like he's going to get 12 fantasy points in this game at most. DJ Chark should have a game because Trevor Lawrence is going to give it to him. He was only at 706 yards and 5 touchdowns, but he should. Marvin Jones, 978 yards and 9 touchdowns. Look out for Marvin Jones to have a 3-touchdown game against the Atlanta Falcons, because I know Marvin Jones is thinking about it. He's earning for it. He wants to finally win, and he's comfortable with Trevor Lawrence. Being on the Lions did not make him comfortable. The Falcons, as I said, were the 24th ranked defense in fantasy football, so you know that they could get the ball moving on them. The Jacksonville Jaguars can. But the Jaguars aren't anything of the same. They're the 29th ranked fantasy football defense last year. Oh, they are awful. If you're 29th, that means the only people that are behind you are the Texans, Jets, and the Lions or Raiders in some categories. But yes, we trust Julio Jones. Calvin Ridley will go. Calvin Ridley, top 5 in fantasy football last year at receiver. 90 catches, 1,374 yards, 9 touchdowns with 277 receiving fantasy points. This guy didn't miss. He only scored single digits twice the whole year. Let me just say his fantasy points. That's all I'm going to say from week 1 to week 17. 34, 29, 16, 21, 18, 19, 7, 14, 17, 15, 16, 32, 18, and 11. This guy doesn't miss. So he's not. Why would he miss this game? Especially against a horrendous Jacksonville defense that I don't see got better at all in free agency. Hayden Hurst, another one who I'd be a little wary of, because I feel like they'll go more to a Calvin Ridley. They'll go more to who else do they have? Julio Jones, than a Hayden Hurst. That's who I feel like because they have Myles Jack and athletic linebackers. They don't have any problems at that. Their problem is their corners and their outside and their pass rush. So Hayden Hurst, the 9th ranked tight end last year, temper expectations to him, probably like 6 to 8 if it's PPR, maybe even 10. Mike Davis, going to have a good day against this Jacksonville rush defense. I'm really, really sold on it, because when it comes to rush yards allowed, the Jacksonville Jaguars are 30th in rush yards allowed and 32nd in rush attempts and 29th in rushing touchdowns. 32nd in rush attempts, that means your MO is run on the Jacksonville Jaguars more than it's on anyone else. Mike Davis still had a good year last year, 642 yards and 6 touchdowns. He proved he could kind of would last a whole year. We don't know about Todd Gurley, though. He just tweeted today, long couple of weeks, but finally about to sign to a team. So we'll see where Todd Gurley lands, and we'll talk about it. But those are the people I'm comfortable with starting and the people I'm a little wary about. I pretty much named all the big stars of that matchup. We are now going to talk about George Kittle and the San Francisco Niners against my boy T. Higgins and Joe Burrow on the Cincinnati Bengals. George Kittle against the Bengals is the best matchup you want. The Bengals are 26th in yards allowed, 19th in pass yards allowed. But see, pass completions, they're 6. And the reason why is because their outside corners are locked down. And you know how you know this? Because in rushing, they have only 29th in rushing. They're 29th in rushing yards allowed, 25th in rush attempts. So once again, an MO is to run on them. Passing touchdowns, they are 26. So that means George Kittle is going to, and the reason why I was saying that George Kittle will get open as opposed to the outside receivers more, because George Kittle is a slot guy. They have to put a safety on him or a cornerback, not a corner, a slot corner or a linebacker on him. They proved that their inside interior is not good by the way that the rush defense is. But now it's an inside guy, and George Kittle is almost automatically always open. Usually a top 3, top 2 fantasy tight end every single year. He was ranked 19th this year because he was tampered by injuries. He was hurt week 2 and 3 and then hurt week 9 through 15. But when he played, it was 8-39, 8-23, 10, 5 he got injured that game, and 13. So when George Kittle plays, he balls out. We already know what Jimmy G feels about him. If they get a rookie quarterback, which they will with that 3rd pick, and he comes in against this game, he is going to give it to George Kittle most of the time because that's a security blanket. That's what tight ends do. They're a big body. George Kittle knows how to create separation more than anyone else in the league. So he's a grinded out dude. The Bengals defense still ranks 28th in fantasy defense, and that's because they just allow a lot of points to happen. So then they're like, oh, now we got to play a shootout. And then they got to play in a shootout, and it's crazy. Brandon Ayuk, temper expectations for him, but he's going to be someone good next year. Trust me, top 5 round receiver to get if you're drafting at least 10 to 12 people. Brandon Ayuk, he's awesome. 60 catches, 748 yards, 5 touchdowns. The best out of anyone in that rookie class behind Justin Jefferson. Easy. Better than Jalen Reagor, better than all the other guys. Because once he started getting it on at the end of the year, once he was playing, he was on. So week 1, week 2, he played against the Jets, got 4. But then he played week 3 through 8. Let me say his fantasy points. 21, 12, 7, 9, 17, 23. That was him just getting adjusted. And this is PPR, points per reception. He got hurt week 9, came back week 10, dropped 20. Then you're like, okay, there's a bye. Then he got hurt against the Rams. He's not playing. Then he dropped 20, 21, 22 fantasy points. This guy's a stud. His most memorable game probably was his 10 catches, 119 yards against the football team, who's a top pass defense. So this boy's no joke. I trust him. Brandon Ayuk should get at least 12 fantasy points in PPR. Joe Burrow, he's going to be out. He's going to be out slinging because in this draft, either they're going to get Kyle Pitts or they are going to get his boy Jamar Chase from the LSU Tigers. Joe Burrow, 25th ranked quarterback last year because he got hurt in week 12 or week 11 against the Washington football team. Didn't play for the rest of the year. Season-ending injury. But he showed a lot of promise, more notably against the Cleveland Browns, week 7, threw for 406 yards, 3 touchdowns. Cleveland Browns are another top fantasy or top real-life defense, not even fantasy. So I trust them a lot. T. Higgins should do his part, should get his 10 to 15 fantasy points. I don't see it going much more than that because the Niners defense is the Niners defense. I mean, last year didn't improve much. But they were still, even though with the bad year, they were still the 13th ranked fantasy defense. Okay? So you got to respect them. T. Higgins will have a moderate game. I'm saying he's going to have a breakout year, but he had 67 catches, 908 yards, 6 touchdowns. He's proven what he could do. But that is only some of the week 17 games added to every single NFL team throughout the league. We're going to go over all the games. Like I said, all the fantasy implications. When we come back after commercial, make sure to stick around at the end of the show. When I talk about a mystery running back who a lot of people want high on fantasy boards, but I'm a little wary of. I've been wary about him, but stick around at the end of the show. After we talk about all these games, I'll talk about him. You're going to want to check it out because, trust me, this guy is going to be someone you might want to draft, and I'm telling you, I don't know, and I have the numbers to back it up.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I am still your host, Ryan Basulto, and we are still here to talk about the newly added games to the NFL schedule. We're going to move on to Russell Wilson versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's not Russell Wilson, it's the Seattle Seahawks. I was just thinking it because that's all Seattle has now, Russell Wilson. I mean, you want DK, okay, you could take him, see how that works, but I'm not too sold on Russell Wilson still being a Seahawk for a long time. But Russell Wilson's still a Seahawk for now. He was a 6th ranked quarterback in fantasy football last year, throwing for 4,200 yards, 40 touchdowns, 13 picks, 17 turnovers. That's a lot of turnovers. A lot of turnovers. That's less than the other quarterback on the other side, which I think it's going to come down to the quarterback matchup. Big Ben. Big Ben has 3,800 yards passing, 33 touchdowns, only 11 turnovers, 14th ranked quarterback. He was hurt though. He was hurt only at the end of the year. He ended up playing. I forgot. Big Ben actually toughed through all those games. He was putting up decent numbers, gave you 21, 18, 19, 21, but then his fantasy numbers declined when he would play against better defenses like the Browns, Titans, and Ravens. Got 10, 12, and 15. Maybe you can only trust him against bad defenses, what it looks like here. The Cowboys, who are one of the worst passing defenses, got 24 fantasy points on 306 yards and 3 touchdowns. 29 fantasy points against the Bengals, 333 yards, 4 touchdowns, no turnovers in these games, by the way. Then the Jaguars still threw for 267 yards and 2 touchdowns. Looks like he went off mainly against teams who aren't that good, on pass defense as opposed to rush defense, because the Seattle Seahawks were terrible when it came to pass defense, and they were 31st in pass yards allowed, 32nd in passing attempts allowed, and 32nd in completions. Listen to that. The Seahawks allowed the most completions in the NFL. The NFL. Yes, they were 9th in passing touchdowns, which means they probably won't find the end zone, but it's the Steelers. Big Ben's got a lot of weapons. Let's start naming them, who I would be comfortable starting in this game as a go. And I'll tell you each of these guys' fantasy projections in my book. They still have Deontay Johnson. Big Ben's going to throw to Deontay. 88 catches, 923 yards, and 7 touchdowns last year. 21st ranked receiver, but I like him a lot better than that because he started to pick it up more at the end of the year. Deontay Johnson, easily getting you 16 fantasy to 18 fantasy points this game. Let's go to the other guy, Chase Claypool. I'm kind of ranking him where I like him too, because I like Chase Claypool a lot, but Deontay Johnson's going to go off in this game. Chase Claypool, another guy who's going to probably be a stud and maybe drop 16 to 20 fantasy points. 22nd ranked receiver. It's funny, they're respectively 21 and 22nd ranked together. It shows the distribution that Big Ben does. 62 catches, 873 yards, 9 touchdowns. Like I said, Seahawks are 31st in pass yards allowed, 32nd in pass attempts, and 32nd in completions. So that means they throw the most on them, and they get it completed on them. The rushing defense, they're 5th in rushing yards and 7th in rushing attempts. So people don't want to rush on them in particular because their pass defense is just so awful. Why would you? So all these receivers are pretty much a go. Juju Smith-Schuster still had 97 catches, 831 yards, and 9 touchdowns. See, I wouldn't draft Juju, me personally. I just wouldn't draft him because I don't like his numbers and what he's been doing. I don't think he's a wide receiver 1. And I think that these wide receiver 2s like Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool are really, really going to ball out, especially next year. So Juju might take a step back. 97 catches, though. That's still a lot of catches. 17th ranked receiver. Best ranked receiver according to ESPN PPR standard points. Out of all the Steelers receivers and that little trio that they have, Juju Smith is the best, apparently. I don't buy it. If I were to rank them, it would be Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, really neck and neck, and then Juju Smith as like a wide receiver 4/5. But Juju could have a good game too, anywhere from 10 to 15 fantasy points. Seahawks defense was the 20th ranked fantasy defense, so they're not doing too well. They just really aren't. If you throw the ball on them, they're not going to do. I mean, against the Cowboys, they only had 5 fantasy points. Are you kidding me? The Cowboys were terrible. The Vikings, who have turnover-prone Kirk Cousins, 4 fantasy points only. -5 to Kyler Murray. The Seahawks defense, aren't you supposed to play Kyler Murray twice? You don't have any like game film on him or anything ready? They just did awful. And then the Buffalo Bills, a high-powered offense, almost like the Pittsburgh Steelers. They only had 1 fantasy point on defense. If you're not getting fantasy points on defense, the reason why is simply because because they throw the ball on you a lot. They throw in the ball and they keep getting a lot of yards because the more yards you allow as a defense, the more negative points accumulate. And then they also throw a lot of touchdowns on you or rush a lot of touchdowns on you. So teams like the Packers, the Bucks, the Chiefs, these are all teams like the Bills. All these teams are teams that just put up, points. And those points are what really matter when it comes to these fantasy defenses because it doesn't look at individual stuff or anything. Chris Carson should have a good game, but once again, the Steelers have the number 1 ranked defense. I don't think that their rush is not the best. They're only 8th in rush yards allowed, and they are also 7th in rush touchdowns allowed. So they're not top premier, but they're still top 10. Because, they're number 1 in fantasy points. The Steelers defense is number 1 in sacks, number 1 in interceptions, number 2 in turnovers, number 3 in points allowed. Number 3 in points allowed. Like I said, if you're not allowing a lot of points, your defense isn't going to take a big hit. Seahawks offense is a high prolific offense. They did score 40 touchdowns last year, which ranked 3rd in the NFL. Their passing yards per game were still top 15, 16. They were actually outside of the top 15. And they had 13 turnovers. You can't make turnovers against the Steelers defense. I'm comfortable starting the Steelers defense. I'm not comfortable starting Chris Carson. I'm not comfortable starting DK Metcalf. I'm more comfortable starting Tyler Lockett, though, because Tyler Lockett's a guy that thrives when DK Metcalf doesn't, and he just signed a 4-year, $67 million deal with the Seahawks, which means they have a lot of faith in him and know he's still the future. The Kansas State Wildcat had 100 catches, 1,054 yards, and 10 touchdowns. He's a go for the Steelers game. He will score 2 touchdowns on the Steelers, as I think he will score 2 touchdowns before DK Metcalf even scores 1 touchdown. Anthony McFarland, James Conner, I don't know who's going to do better, but McFarland is supposed to do better just because the quarterback's coach he worked with at in his college. So, it should help. What's his face? Matt Canada. He replaced Ryan Fisher, who was criticized for, having the 31st, 29th, and 32nd in rushing yards during his 3-year span. So they're going to try to run the ball more. That's usually what teams try to do. So I don't trust him because it's Anthony McFarland, Benny Snell, and James Conner. Fade all those guys. I don't care how terrible the Seahawks defense is. They're going to throw it on them more. Let's go on. We're going to move on to the Vikings versus the Chargers. Dalvin Cook basically against that Chargers defense. Dalvin Cook, number 2 fantasy running back. He rushed 300 and 12 times. That is crazy. That is absolutely insane because no one else I mentioned has rushed 300 yards on this out of all the people I've mentioned so far, or 300 times. 1,500 rush yards, 16 touchdowns. Dalvin Cook had a 48 fantasy point game against the Packers. 30 rushes, 163 yards, 3 touchdowns. I advise getting him. I advise getting him over that mystery running back who I have at the end of the show. Stick around. But yeah, I advise him over him. The Chargers don't have a great rush defense. They rank 18 in rushing touchdowns allowed, 14 in rushing attempts, and 18 in rushing yards. If there's a thing to pick on the Chargers, it's that rush defense. That pass defense isn't the best, but they still don't allow that many points. The Chargers are still 7th in points allowed. I'm cool with starting Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook's going to have probably a 20 to 20-something point game on the 21st ranked fantasy defense in the Chargers. Justin Herbert, though, oh my goodness. Justin Herbert. I think Justin Herbert's going to have a game. He would have a good game. This Vikings defense is not a good pass defense. They're actually 25th in pass yards allowed, 27th in total yards allowed, and 23rd in passing touchdowns. Justin Herbert, the 9th-ranked quarterback coming out of Oregon onto the Chargers last year, 4,336 passing yards last year, 31 touchdowns. That was his rookie year. One of the most historic rookie years, threw for the most passing yards in rookie history. Chargers knew they were going to start him from week 1. He scored 20 fantasy points from week 2 to week 11 in all but one game. So in a 9-week span, he scored 20 fantasy points. You can't expect, more from a rookie. The Vikings don't have the best passing defense. They're the 27th ranked fantasy defense. I don't have any faith in them when it comes to teams that like to throw the ball a lot. They don't do good. The Packers, the Falcons, -4 fantasy points against the Falcons. The Tampa Bay Bucks got 0. The Saints, who we know is a passing team, got -8 points. This is all the Vikings, by the way. So I don't trust them. So that means start Keenan Allen, the 13th ranked receiver. He had 100 catches for 992 yards and 8 touchdowns, finished with 238 fantasy points. Start Jared Cook. The Vikings don't have good linebackers and good DB, so might as well start the big red zone target. I think he's going to do good. Even at the age of 34, he still scored 7 touchdowns last year. They're trying to put him in that Antonio Gates role where he's going to get like 1 to 2 touchdowns a game. I trust it. Austin Eckler, he's going to be a great pass-catching back. Last year, he was just hurt by injuries, but when he played, he was good. 18 fantasy points, 30 fantasy points, 23 fantasy points, 10, 22, 11, 15, 16 in all the games he played. When the games he didn't play, from weeks 11 to weeks 5, obviously that's a lot of weeks being out. So Austin Eckler came back and he showed you that he's worth the first or second round fantasy pick. I'd go second round. Second round if it's a 10-man to 12-man league. Justin Jefferson, he's a go. He's a huge go on my end. I know the Chargers only allowed the 9th most passing yards. I know that the Chargers also allowed only the 6th most passing completions. But Justin Jefferson is going to still do good. You can't guard him. You can't double him because they have Adam Thielen on the other side. So Justin Jefferson ranked 6th in fantasy points out of receivers last year. As a rookie, by the way. 88 catches, 1,400 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And then Adam Thielen still ranked 10th in fantasy out of all fantasy receivers with 74 catches, 925 yards, and 14 touchdowns. Kirk Cousins was still the 11th ranked fantasy quarterback last year, throwing for over 4,200 yards and 35 touchdowns. He's not someone you can win a Super Bowl with, but I'm a go with him. I'm a go with Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook. Every big name on that Vikings offense start, along with every big name on that Chargers offense start. I feel like it's going to be a shootout. It's going to end up like 35-30. Their defenses aren't that stellar on different ends, and I already know someone's going to get exposed because these teams aren't going to the Super Bowl, nor are they going to any type of championship game. Let's talk about the Ravens. The Ravens are going against the Rams. We are all watching Lamar Jackson go against that number 1 fantasy defense in the Rams. Lamar Jackson had a fall-off year last year after his Madden curse year where he threw for only 2,700 yards, 26 touchdowns. Still had only 26 touchdowns thrown. Awful, by the way. Lamar Jackson was the 10th ranked fantasy quarterback out of everyone in the NFL, but this Rams defense is no joke. It's what everyone talks about. They're third in points allowed, second in fantasy points allowed, second in sacks, 12th in interceptions, 10th in turnovers, first in points allowed, third in plays allowed. That means not many people get plays off of them. First in yards allowed, first in pass yards allowed. You can't pass on them, so they're going to try to just make you run the ball. Oh, wait, but they're third in rush yards allowed, fourth in rush attempts, so that means people don't want to run on them, and fourth in rushing touchdowns. What are they going to do? I don't like Lamar Jackson in this matchup. The Rams are going to bottle him up. The Rams always lock up people with heavy run games. The Washington football team, they locked him up. The Bears have a heavy run game. They locked them up. The Bucs have a heavy run game. The Niners, the Patriots, all these people, the Cardinals, they all have heavy run games, and they locked him up for over double-digit fantasy points in most instances. Cam Akers is going to have a good game against this Ravens rush defense. I know they've only allowed the 8th least rush yards last year, but Cam Akers is ready to ball. When he finally started getting the starting position, mainly in Week 7, Week 12, he had 14 fantasy points, then 16 fantasy points, then 21 fantasy points against the Patriots in a historic game where he broke the rookie rushing Rams record, 29 rushes, 171 yards. This guy's a stud. He's a stud. Only behind Jonathan Taylor is he on my list of like great second-year running backs coming out in fantasy football. J.K. Dobbins, it's going to be him versus J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins had 134 rushes for 805 yards and 9 touchdowns. The Rams defense, as I said, isn't good at allowing that many rushing yards or rushing touchdowns just in general, ranking 3rd and 4th in those categories. J.K. Dobbins is someone I'm going to fade. He's going to score 8 to 10 fantasy points. If he scores 12, I'd be shocked. Marquise Brown with Jalen Ramsey, fade. Just don't. I'm not even going to go over that one. 58 catches for 769 yards and 8 touchdowns. Marquise Brown is the lightest and smallest receiver in the NFL, going against the toughest and baddest corner at Jalen Ramsey on the defensive end. Stop. That's something I'm not looking forward to. If he gets a touchdown, it's a lucky touchdown at best, and that's not something we're here on the Fantasy Football Show to get to be about. The GSMC Fantasy Football Show is to get people to be champions. Not we're lucky. We're champions over here, all right? Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. If I'm starting anyone, it's Robert Woods, because I feel like even though Matt Stafford can rip up that defense, you still can't. Marlon Humphreys, man. Marlon Humphreys, Jimmy Smith, all those corners on that Ravens defense are no joke. That's why the Ravens are better, mainly better at pass coverage. They're 7th in pass yards allowed and 5th in passing touchdowns. So that means you're not going to really rush and get stuff off of them. These receivers should have low ceiling games, but I feel like Robert Woods is going to have the highest out of everyone, or Tyler Higbee. More Robert Woods, though, because they like to force feed him when the offense isn't moving in too much. Robert Woods was the 14th ranked receiver last year on 90 catches, 936 yards, 6 touchdowns. Those 90 catches show you that they like to throw to him, and they like to throw to him more frequently than anyone else. Yes, Cooper Kupp had 92 catches, but he does get hurt a lot of times. That 5th ranked fantasy defense in the Ravens isn't anything to play with. I am not too confident starting Cooper Kupp, more confident starting Robert Woods, and more confident starting Cam Akers. But I'm not starting J.K. Dobbins, Marquise Brown, or any of these other guys that I said. Let's move on to next game. Cardinals versus the Cleveland Browns. This is really against the two guys who used to be colleagues, used to be in a quarterback competition against each other. The underbake, Baker Mayfield, versus Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray was a 3rd-ranked quarterback last year, throwing for 397 yards, 26 touchdowns, had 16 turnovers, as a young guy should. But him and Baker Mayfield, who was the 17th-ranked quarterback last year, are having better years. Next year should be another step in growth for both of them. Baker Mayfield, I know he's a little older than him by 2 years, but the reason why I say that is because Baker Mayfield has better coaching now. He has Steven Stefanski, has a good system, a good foundation. Everybody needs a good foundation. Kyler Murray's just, getting his third. He got a sophomore, I guess slump you could say out of the way. But I'm starting Kyler Murray this game. I'm starting Baker Mayfield this game. I'm starting Nick Chubb this game, who was the 11th ranked fantasy running back last year, and he was still hurt last year. 11th and 10th in Kareem Hunt. Kareem is the 10th ranked running back. Nick Chubb, more of the bruiser, 1,067 rushing yards with 12 touchdowns. Kareem Hunt was more of the catcher, but he still had 841 yards and 6 touchdowns. Feed these running backs. That's all they're going to do. The Browns are just going to feed the running backs. They average the third most rushing yards per game with the 148 behind the Ravens, of course the Ravens, and the Titans. Only 2 ridiculous rush offenses in front of them. They're third in rushing touchdowns with 21. That is the formula. They figured it out. Keep it going. The Cardinals are the 7th ranked rushing offense, though, not far behind, and 4th in rushing touchdowns. They are good as well with 22 rushing touchdowns on the year. So Kyler Murray's going to get open. Nick Chubb's going to rush all over the place. It should be a good game, but the only problem is that pass defense of the Cleveland Browns. Even though the Cleveland Browns have only allowed the 9th most rushing yards last year, which is not much at all, that pass defense is even better for them. They allowed only the 7th most pass yards in the NFL. So I don't know about DeAndre Hopkins, but you can't fade D-Hop. He was a 4th ranked receiver in fantasy last year, 115 catches, 1,400 yards, 6 touchdowns. This guy is going to have a way better game. I'm fading Odell Beckham this game. Fading him completely. He's too much of a drama queen. He's going to get hurt. They're trying to beef up that secondary. They're going to put Budda Baker over the top of him as opposed to Jarvis Landry. The Browns fantasy defense, the Cardinals fantasy defense is 10th last year, so that means they make big plays. They know how to take it to the house. But the Browns minimalize you making big plays because they run the ball, they keep it slow, they keep it steady. I think that the Browns would win this game. I'm starting Nick Chubb. I'm starting the rushing attack of the Cardinals with Chase Edmonds, but I'm not starting Odell Beckham. I'm also starting DeAndre Hopkins. I still won't get A.J. Green or Larry Fitzgerald. They're just too old for me. They're not consistent, and they're too old for me. Let's move on to the next matchup. The Buffalo Bills going on against the Washington football team. Should be a good matchup. The 4th ranked defense in the Washington football team are going against the number 1 quarterback in fantasy football last year, Josh Allen. A lot of fantasy people were saying stay away from Josh Allen. I've loved Josh Allen. Josh Allen is great because one time he won me a fantasy, championship by scoring 50 points in a fantasy game, but that's besides the point. He threw for 4,500 yards, or as I said, 37 touchdowns. He has Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, and Cole Beasley, and Emmanuel Sanders. That's a lot of firepower from them. But the Washington football team is 2nd in pass yards allowed, 3rd in pass completions allowed, and 2nd in passing touchdowns allowed, only behind the Rams. Their defense is balling. Josh Allen runs the ball, though, and that's the problem. And that's why he's gotten 30 fantasy points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times in the year, and over 20 the other half of those times. Josh Allen is unguardable. You can't guard him because Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, who were terrible running backs, by the way, who only combined for 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns, were nothing compared to his firepower of Stephon Diggs, 2nd-ranked receiver in fantasy, Cole Beasley, who got 82 catches, 967 yards, 4 touchdowns, and Gabriel Davis, who got 35 catches, 599 yards, and 7 touchdowns his rookie year. He still has Dawson Knox, who's a young tight end that Josh Allen liked a lot. So many weapons. So many weapons. I'm starting everyone on this team. Besides the running backs of the Buffalo Bills, I'm not starting Zach Moss or Devin Singletary. And I am not starting Dawson Knox yet until he's given me more proof. But Cole Beasley, Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, I still trust them against this tough Washington football defense because Josh Allen is pretty much unguardable. Ryan Fitzpatrick on the other end, though, it's his time. He's now going for another revenge tour against another team that he used to play for because he's played for every single team. The Harvard product threw for 2,091 yards and 13 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. And he only started 6 games. He only started 6 games, came in for 2 on that Las Vegas Raider crazy comeback miracle that helped me win my fantasy championship. But he scored over 20 fantasy points in 4 of those games. He scored terrible one time, 2 points against the Broncos, but other than that, 19 points, 15 points, and then the 20s. Ryan Fitzpatrick knows how to give it to his receivers. Antonio Gibson's going to make it easier. The 13th ranked running back is going to have a better year next year. Going to be top 10 for sure. Had 795 rushes for 11 touchdowns last year. That just showed that he knows how to find the end zone, but he can also catch the ball. Against the Ravens, he had 4 catches for 82 yards. Against the Lions, he had 4 catches, 20 yards. This guy knows how to catch it from the backfield. It's not only J.D. McKissic. I'm starting him. I'm starting Logan Thomas, the 3rd-ranked tight end in fantasy last year, with 670 yards and 6 touchdowns. I see Logan Thomas against this Buffalo Bills team getting, 15 to 20 fantasy points. Terry McLaurin's still going to get his. Even though he's going against Tre'Davious White, he'll get 12 fantasy points. Still on a terrible year with Dwayne Haskins, Heineke, Alex Smith, whoever you name it. He still had 87 catches, 1,100 yards, and 4 touchdowns in his 2nd year in the league. Imagine his 3rd year. Oh, with his college roommate, by the way, Curtis Samuel, who's next to him. And then they just added Adam Humphries. And Adam Humphries has experience with Ryan Fitzpatrick because they used to play together on the Bucs back in 2017, 2018. So all these guys are all Ryan Fitzpatrick's disposal. I'm starting Terry McLaurin. I'm starting Logan Thomas. I'm starting Antonio Gibson. Ryan Fitzpatrick I'm starting too, but I'm fading Curtis Samuel and Adam Humphries because no, I'm not fading Curtis Samuel. I'm not fading Curtis Samuel at all, actually. Because if anything, Curtis Samuel is going to do better against the Buffalo Bills because they're going to try to go to Terry McLaurin. It's not going to work too often just for the simple fact that Tre'Davious White is a top 3 Pro Football Focus corner. So you have to always respect him. So Terry McLaurin's going to get some, 4 catches, 80 yards, and that's it. But Curtis Samuel's going to get probably the touchdowns with Antonio Gibson in the end zone because Curtis Samuel lined up at running back, remember, on the Panthers this year. So a lot of good matchups. We talked about all the fantasy implications. We talked about who I like in each of these matchups. There's still more matchups. So we're going to go over those. And then stick around at the end of the show when I talk about the mystery running back. The guy, he wears a blue jersey. Not too sold on him, but he's athletic as heck. And you can't really find much more people who's a pure strength, athletic, strong running back than him. But I'm still wary about him. Stick around at the end of the show, and you will figure out what running back I'm talking about. This is the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, where we make you guys champions.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And we are back to talk about the last slate of the newly added games to the NFL schedule for all 32 teams. We are talking about that and their fantasy implications. Thank you again for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I just want to make you guys champions. I do all the research I can. I try to learn everything I can. I'm constantly watching and lurking fantasy football news because it's all that matters to me for some reason. I don't get it. Maybe it's sad. Maybe it's cute. I don't know. Let me know at Twitter. Let me know on YouTube. Let us all know at the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I want to know your critique and criticism. And I also want to know if you think we all have what it takes to win the Fantasy Football Championship next year. Because I think that I'm helping you guys enough, because I'm helping you with every single aspect of fantasy football, and I'm giving you my honest opinion. I'm not here to sell shows or to do anything. This is raw opinion with numbers, backed up with numbers. It's not, oh, hey, I think you should start Alvin Kamara this week because he was good. He did really good. I remember when he ran against those guys that one time. It was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. And that's my voice of uncertainty, I guess. But speaking about Alvin Kamara, we're going to talk about the Saints. They take on the Tennessee Titans. And this is all about Alvin Kamara, the number 1 ranked running back last year in fantasy football. He ran a lot, and I don't know what else he did. No, I'm kidding. Alvin Kamara was a beast. 932 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns. 16 touchdowns on only 187 carries. That's efficient. Dalvin Cook, it took him 312 carries to get 16 touchdowns. The reason being is because his receiving's off the charts. 9 catches, 95 yards. 13 catches, 139 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That's from a running back. 8 catches, 65 yards. 9 catches, 96 yards. 7 catches, 44 yards. This guy is a stud at running back. He's a dual threat, and that's what makes him crazier. If Taysom Hill is his quarterback, he's going to throw it to him a lot because Taysom Hill can't throw that well. He only threw for 928 yards and 4 touchdowns, and out of those 4 touchdowns, he threw 2 picks. So that means 50%, almost 50% of your throws are interception to touchdown ratios. Man, Taysom Hill can't throw. So as long as he's there, they're going to run it. They're going to milk it. They're going to use that running system. If Jameis Winston's there, he's going to throw to Michael Thomas a lot. I wholeheartedly believe he'll throw to Michael Thomas because this Tennessee Titans defense is not that good when it comes to passing yards allowed. They rank in the bottom 4, actually. They're 29th in passing yards allowed, 31 in passing attempts, 29th in passing completions, 31 in passing touchdowns. Like I said, if there's a lot of pass attempts against you, that means they know you stink at coverage, so they're going to expose you more. They got rid of Adoree Jackson. They got rid of Malcolm Butler. So let's see if they got better, but I'm guessing no. They're going to throw it on them a lot if Jameis Winston was there. Like I said, Michael Thomas, 92nd ranked fantasy receiver last year after I drafted him in the first pick. Thank goodness I got rid of him. Had 40 catches, 438 yards. Was hurt from week 2 to week 8, then week 15 through week 17. His best game he gave us was 9 catches, 105 yards against the Falcons. That's not enough. We got more from that receiving on Alvin Kamara. I like Traquan Smith in this one. He is the number 2 now that Emmanuel Sanders is out. It is only fitting that it is his time. He only had 34 catches for 448 yards and 4 touchdowns. But I said they stink at passing yards allowed and how many passing touchdowns allowed with 31. So they're going to try to throw it. They don't have Jared Cook. They don't have Emmanuel Sanders. They just don't have much weapons that they used to have. So now they're going to probably pick up through the draft or rely on Traquan Smith and Michael Thomas. I see them both going off. But let's talk about the other running back, the stud, the number 3 ranked running back last year, Derrick Henry. 2,000 rushing yards, 378 rushing attempts. Means they run it with them all the time. 17 rushing touchdowns. Goodness gracious. Oh my goodness. I just can't believe it. The Titans have the 19th ranked rush defense with they're 19th in rushing yards allowed, and in touchdowns are 22nd in rushing touchdowns. So that means they're going to give up a lot to Alvin Kamara, but on the other end, it's a lot different with the Saints. The Saints are ranked 4th in rush yards allowed, 5th in rushing attempts allowed, and 2nd in rushing touchdowns. You do not run on the Saints that often. They're going to run it with Derrick Henry. The problem is he's not a good pass catching back, so they're not going to try to, throw it to him too much. They're going to give it to another shiftier backup. They always get a new one every year. It's Dion Lewis. Then it's someone else. It's always someone different. It's Evans last year. Who knows who it is this year? But the 6th ranked fantasy defense in the Saints, nothing to play with. They had 18 interceptions and 8 fumble recoveries on the year. That's a lot of turnovers on the year. That's ranked 3rd in turnovers on the year, to be exact. Their fantasy defense was stellar. Really, really, really stellar. So, A.J. Brown, he's going to thrive, though. I know all the numbers have said no, but Ryan Tannehill to A.J. Brown is a connection that's definitely going to happen. A.J. Brown had a great year with 1,000 yards and still got hurt 1,075 yards and 11 touchdowns and still got hurt 3 games. Imagine if he played those 3 games, he probably would have 1,300 yards and 14 touchdowns, which would be one of the top 6 off receiving performances of the year. He was ranked 12th at receiver just due to injuries, as I said. But I see him having a good game on Marshawn Lattimore. Marshawn Lattimore steps it up against good receivers, but I don't think people still think that A.J. Brown's a top 5 receiver like I do. So, Marshawn Lattimore will soon learn, and he will soon see. Let's go on to this next stellar matchup. Colts versus the Bucs. The Bucs don't allow many rushing yards, and they're going to go against Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is my favorite running back besides Alvin Kamara. 6th ranked in fantasy points last year out of running backs. 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns. He gets it going at the end of the year, but the problem is the Bucs got everyone back. Levante David, Shaq Barrett, Devin White. They still have Antoine Winfield at safety. But the Bucs have allowed the least amount of rushing touchdowns, the least amount of rushing yards, and the least amount of rushing attempts because people throw it on them the 31st most in the NFL. You can't rush on the Bucs. Their rush defense is stout. They still brought back Ndamukong Suh. They still have Jason Pierre-Paul. They still have Psycho Tom Brady to be giving them all the sauce on championship defense. So Jonathan Taylor is probably going to only get like 8 fantasy points this game because they're going to have to throw it to Nyheim Hines or put in Jordan Wilkins or Marlon Mack of that matter to get some extra rushes to get the eyes off of Jonathan Taylor in the backfield because in the end, the Colts just want to win. Based on the game plan, it's probably not going to work for Jonathan Taylor too much, but that Colts defense is not bad. They're 2nd in rush yards allowed, 5th in rush attempts, and they're 5th in turnovers. So they get the ball a lot. They're 12th in sacks, 7th in interceptions, 5th in fantasy points allowed, 1st in points allowed. They allowed the least amount of points all last year. So technically kind of the number 1 defense, which means their defense doesn't get scored on much, which means they're still, like I said, the 3rd ranked fantasy defense, according to ESPN. They know how to score on defense. They scored 6 touchdowns. That's the most out of anybody I've seen on this list so far. They scored the most touchdowns on defense out of anyone. That's what breaks them special. That Colts defense is not going to allow the rush of Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones to go off. One of them may go off. I'm not willing to take that gamble. Carson Wentz, are we going to risk him against the Tampa Bay Bucs? Well, it says they throw 31st most times in the NFL on the Bucs. So, I mean, that's your only option, right? So, I say it's basically predicated on Michael Pittman Jr. Can Michael Pittman Jr. get open? Because T.Y. Hilton's going to be old and may get open, but can Michael Pittman, can Mo Alley Cox find the end zone? Can Dwayne Allen, or not Dwayne Allen, Jack Doyle or Mo Alley Cox or Trey Burton shake Levante David or any of these awesome, great linebackers of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Can they? Because I know Tampa Bay is going to put up points, and that's why I still wouldn't start the Colts defense. They have Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Rob Gronkowski. First of all, Chris Godwin had 840 yards, 7 touchdowns. Mike Evans was the 11th ranked receiver with 70 yards, 1,000 touchdowns, and 1,000 yards receiving, and 13 touchdowns. Rob Gronkowski was the 8th ranked tight end, 45 catches, 623 yards, and 7 touchdowns. They still have Scotty Miller. I don't know if Antonio Brown's coming back because he wants more money, but I would not start the Colts defense. I would like to start the Bucs defense more just because who am I going to trust to do it more? Carson Wentz against apparently, I guess, the bad Tampa Bay pass defense, or am I going to start Tom Brady against the Bucs? But he has all these weapons, so who are you going to guard? You can't guard everyone with Darius Leonard, Xavier Rhodes, and your safeties, and Malik Hooker. Everyone can't get guarded. There's too many people on the field, too many weapons, too much savviness in the mind of Tom Brady. Let's go on to the next matchup. Eagles versus the New York Jets. We're going to kind of skim through this one because I wouldn't start much. Jalen Hurts, I'll start. He had 1,000 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, but he had 6 turnovers too. They didn't really start him until Week 14 against the Saints, where he had 18 fantasy points, 37 against the Arizona Cardinals in Week 15, and then 17 against the Cowboys, 15 against the football team, but they did pull him out for Nate Sudfeld in a part of that game. Jalen Hurts, with this opportunity, is going to go crazy on the Jets. The Jets are not one of the premier defenses. They do not allow in pass yards. Excuse me for a second, sorry. In pass yards, they are 28th and 29th in pass attempts and 29th in pass completions and 31st in pass touchdowns. The only people that allow more passing touchdowns are the Detroit Lions. And if you're in any category with the Detroit Lions, you're not in a good category. The Jets are still rebuilding. They don't know what they want to do. The problem is Jalen Hurts is going to get a lot of fantasy points, but I don't know if Jalen Reagor is. Jalen Reagor only had 31 catches, 396 yards. He was hurt a lot of the year. But, I mean, he still played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games. And in those 10 games, the most fantasy points he scored was 12 against the Dallas Cowboys, who had one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. You're not starting these guys, but the Eagles were not too stellar on the pass defense either. So I would start Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder, even though the Eagles did have the 3rd most sacks in the NFL, which doesn't help, because I think the Jets line isn't the best in the world. But I would still start Jamison Crowder, who was the 39th ranked fantasy receiver last year, 699 yards, 6 touchdowns, because they're going to need to find someone who needs to get open right away. Because they're going to panic, sack, oh shoot, I'm going to get sacked, what do? Look at my checkdowns, oh, I'm scared. Let me just quickly throw it to Corey Davis. I trust Corey Davis, I trust Jamison Crowder, I don't trust Jalen Reagor, and I don't trust Denzel Mims, and I don't trust Tevin Coleman. Because they're going to get in that backfield, and Tevin Coleman is going to get bottled up real easily with that Philadelphia defense, because the Philadelphia defense does not really allow that many rushing touchdowns on them. Actually, no, I am wrong. They allow the 21st most rushing touchdowns. Start Tevin Coleman at your own risk, but I wouldn't start it because I still don't like that matchup. Next matchup, New England Patriots versus the Dallas Cowboys. Good matchup. We're going to see how Zeke fares against one of the Bill Belichick defenses. Zeke, not having a stellar year last year, was still the 9th ranked running back, still had 244 carries, 976 yards, 6 touchdowns. Dak's back though, and that's all that matters. Dak Prescott was leading the league in touchdowns and passing yards before he got hurt. But the New England Patriots, even on a down year, were still the 12th ranked fantasy defense. Passing completions, the New England Patriots rank 4th in the least amount of passing completions. You don't throw on the Patriots. They're the least thrown on team. You mainly run on the Patriots. So Zeke should have a great game. Dak should have a great game because he uses his legs a lot and he's a mobile, elite quarterback. But CeeDee Lamb, temper your expectations for him. I know the 22 ranked receiver out of Oklahoma had 74 catches, 935 yards, and 5 touchdowns last year. This game, he'll probably be the best one out of the 3, but he will still only get you 12 to 15 fantasy points. Coop is only going to get you 10 to 12. Gallup's going to get you 8 to 10. They're going to run the ball. They trust Tony Pollard as that backup more. Cam Newton, the Dallas Cowboys cannot have played rush defense. They allow the 31st most rush yards, the 31st most rushed on team, and the 25th most rushing touchdowns. Cam Newton is going to come back. He's more acclimated in the offense. I know he only threw for 8 touchdowns last year and 10 picks, geesh. But now he has Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, 2 top 15 fantasy tight ends, and they're going to help him with his fantasy stock. The Dallas Cowboys cannot guard anybody. They allow the 27th most passing touchdowns. So what's going to happen is Cam Newton's going to rush down the field. They're going to run it with Damian Harris. They're going to run it with Sony Michel, James White, whatever the Bill Belly tricks are. And then they're going to throw it to Jonnu Smith or Hunter Henry because they're great tight ends. And they got both of them. I don't know how they got the 2 top tight ends in free agency, but they got them both. So I trust them both against this Dallas Cowboys offense. I wouldn't trust the Patriots running backs. You could trust one, but the question is, which one? And I can't tell you which one's going to be good. If I was going to tell you one, I would just say Damian Harris because he's the bruiser. But what if the Patriots go behind because the Patriots aren't as good with Tom Brady, and then they have to throw with James White, and then James White gets the fantasy points, and you're yelling at me. So I don't trust any of their running backs in this matchup. I don't care if the Dallas Cowboys were the 23rd ranked fantasy defense last year. Still don't trust them. Next game, Tua and the Dolphins take on Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. Well, actually, first, before we talk about that one, let's talk about this other one, because this game, let's just brush through. Texans versus the Panthers. The Panthers have Teddy Bridgewater, Christian McCaffrey. How's Christian McCaffrey going to do when he comes back? Is the real question. How is Christian McCaffrey going to do? And I think he's going to go off on the 30th ranked fantasy defense in the Texans. And the reason why is not only that, but they're the 32nd. They allowed the 32nd most rushing yards last year, 30th in rush attempts, and 30th in rushing touchdowns allowed, 28th in red zone touchdowns, 29th in first downs. Their third down percentage is 29th worst in the NFL. They get the 32nd least amount of turnovers. They don't get turnovers. Christian McCaffrey is who I'd start, and then and DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson. Those are my three guys I'm starting. I'm not starting anybody on the Texans because it's going to be Tyrod Taylor ever since that terrible news coming out of Deshaun Watson, because this guy's sneaky and massage parlors. He's not even going to those behind door massage parlors. He's actually just going to whatever. He's too much, and he's way too loud. But I don't trust Tyrod Taylor. I don't trust Phillip Lindsay. I don't trust David Johnson, and I don't trust Mark Ingram. All of the three old running backs, I don't trust any of them. I don't trust not one of them on this Panthers rush defense. And I don't, and it's not like the Panthers rush defense is that great, because yards allowed, they rank bottom 15. They rank bottom 15. So you could get it going against them, but they're going to have to throw the ball. And the Panthers don't allow that many pass completions. They just don't. So, no. I'm fading this game. The only person you start, Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson. Because the Texans can't get a turnover. They can't play pass defense. And they haven't tried to look better this whole offseason. So I know that they're just trying to tank. So it's okay. Some teams want to tank. That's just what they want to do. And if they want to do it, we're not going to be part of it with this championship season on the line. Dolphins versus Giants, what you all been waiting for. The Dolphins have Tua Tagovailoa. Didn't have a great year last year. Started week 9 and on. Best game was against the Chiefs. 316 yards, 2 touchdowns, 26 fantasy points. But the Giants don't have the worst, pass defense in the world. They're not bottom in the NFL. They're middle of the pack. They're ranked 12th in the NFL in pass yards allowed. They are going against Tua, who is also mistake prone. He threw 11 touchdowns, but also had 6 turnovers. So that's still not a good even ratio right there. But Tua now has Will Fuller, who had 879 yards and 8 touchdowns on 53 catches. When he played, he had 19 fantasy points, 15 fantasy points, 22, 15, 24, 12, 21, 8, 14, and 35 fantasy points until he got hurt for the rest of the year. Then they have Devontae Parker, who had a stellar year last year. 16, 11, 21, 13, 8 fantasy points, all from weeks 1 through 5. He got hurt in the last couple of weeks, but he still gave you 18, 19. He gave you good days. You have him. I would start Devontae Parker. I would start Will Fuller in this game, because even though the Giants are trying to get revamped on defense, I still don't trust it too much. Myles Gaskin. We like Myles Gaskin here. Myles Gaskin is the 25th ranked running back. Yes, I know, last year in fantasy. But when he played, he was good. Especially in PPR. Every single game he played was double digits except one. And that was 9 points. That was 1 point short, including that 33-point performance that helped me win a championship against the Las Vegas Raiders, where he caught 2 touchdowns. But this Dolphins defense, man, are they going to give Daniel Jones, who was a 23rd ranked quarterback last year with 2,900 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 16 turnovers? That's a lot of turnovers for that offense. He has that, and then he has all the weapons. He has Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Evan Ingram, Kenny Galladay, and Saquon Barkley. All these guys are at Danny Dimes' disposal? Will he know how to use them? I don't know who I would start on that team. I would only start if I'm starting people because that Miami defense was the 5th ranked fantasy football defense in the NFL because they would get touchdowns. That's just what they would do. They know how to get turnovers. They were the number 1 turnover defense, number 1 intercepting defense, 10th in sacks, 4th in fantasy points allowed, 5th in points allowed, 2nd in passing touchdowns allowed. They don't let much happen. And then you're telling me that Giants line that had Daniel Jones running for his life and getting hurt in the year, and Saquon Barkley who got hurt after week 2, he only had 19 carries for 34 yards. That's a very pathetic year. Very, very pathetic. But I don't even want to talk about the Giants that much because you already guessed who I'm going to talk about in this next segment. We are going to talk about Saquon Barkley. We are done with all the games in the NFL. I gave you all the fantasy implications that went along with those games and where I think those teams stand against each other and how they're going to do or fare against each other based on the numbers and the analytics and what I've seen since I have been playing fantasy football for 14 years. But we're going to talk about Saquon Barkley after we come back from the break. I don't buy him. I just don't buy him. But, stick around after the commercial and I'll explain why.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you for sticking around at the end of the show, where we are going to talk about a lot of good stuff. We are going to actually break down why I don't believe in Saquon Barkley next year. And it's not because I wouldn't draft Saquon Barkley, it's I won't draft him where he's supposed to be drafted. So if you play in a 10-man to 12-man league, he's probably going to get drafted first round because running backs are hard to come by, and I don't think he'll slip to the second. If he slips to the second round, he's going early pick. So you have to be in a comfortable position where maybe you're like, okay, first pick, I was the 9th or 10th pick, so I got D-Hop or Austin Eckler, and then now I'm going to get Saquon Barkley to pair him up with it. So I won't be able to get Saquon Barkley. Very rarely will anybody be able to get Saquon Barkley. That's why just in general, I'm saying fade him. People are trying to make him look a lot better because of people are optimistic. Especially since I may be seeing some news that's happening out of California a lot. A lot of people are too optimistic over here. And I need to, stop all that optimism and we need to just go down to the bare facts. I was looking at Instagram and I saw fantasyfootball.101 on Instagram. They put this thing called fantasy splits. And they're showing the numbers, how Saquon Barkley was with Odell Beckham and without Odell Beckham. With Odell Beckham, he averaged 22 touches a game, 129 yards, 1 touchdown a game, and 25 fantasy points. Without Odell Beckham, without a good receiver on the outside, number 1, he got 1 less touch, 15 less yards at 114.24 yards per game, 0.35 less touchdowns. So instead of 1 touchdown a game, it's 0.65. And 19.48 fantasy points as opposed to 25.13. A 5-point difference in fantasy points. And this whole guy's whole point was just that Saquon Barkley is an elite running back if he has a wide receiver one. And that Saquon Barkley only has two parts that really defined his career in these two periods of like Saquon Barkley's short 3-year career going on his 4th year. One, when he's been the focal point of the offense but had a supporting weapon. And then two, when he's been to the focal point of the offense but hasn't had any other weapons on the offensive side, because it's usually Evan Ingram, Sterling Shepard, and Darius Slay, and that's what Daniel Jones was liking to throw to. But apparently when he had Odell Beckham, Barkley was the best running back in fantasy, posting all those numbers that I said before. And it was due to him not receiving 8+ defenders in the box. Now let's calm down. Because that's exactly what happened this year. They put 8 people in the box. But is Kenny Galladay on the same level of Odell Beckham rookie year? Yes, Kenny Galladay didn't have a stellar year last year, but he had 20 catches, 338 yards, 2 touchdowns, making him the 100th ranked receiver in fantasy football. But Kenny Galladay, I don't think he's... Yes. You know what? He is that good. He is that good. You're right. Because I also said that he has put up as good of numbers as Calvin Johnson within his first 3 years. But the problem isn't if he has the number one receiver and it's going to bring the most out of Saquon. The problem is it's going to be obvious it's going to Saquon and he's going to get hurt again. So Bo Jackson. Bo Jackson was an elite running back for the Oakland Raiders. He played in the 1980s after he went to Auburn College. After he graduated from Auburn, got drafted by the Oakland Raiders. Great running back. Super powerful. If you look at the 60 for 60 on Bo Jackson's a freak of nature. This guy would literally say he would throw apples as fast as he can in the countryside and throw them through doors, and they would rip through the door. Granted, they were, those trap doors that are like a net in front of it, but still, he'd be able to throw it through it. He had crazy strength, unbelievably strong legs, and he was just a freak athlete. And he's saying that it wasn't official, but he ran a 4.1, and he pretty much ran the fastest time in NFL history. Saquon Barkley, can he bounce back from that though? Can he? And Bo Jackson, my point is, Bo Jackson got injured in a playoff game against the Cincinnati Bengals. He hyperextended his hip, and he basically jumped, like when he stomped on the ground with forward motion, there was science involved. His knee hit the ground, and when that happened, it popped out his hip, and that was not due to, oh, hey, he did a wrong play at the wrong move at the wrong time, and he got tackled from behind very awkwardly. But it was due to the sheer power of his legs, how strong his legs were. Saquon Barkley, there's videos of him lifting dozens of plates. This guy's huge. He's 5'11", 233. Stocky guy. He's strong. You see plenty of videos on social media of him in the weight room. You know what he does. You know how the true strength and power he has because of his rookie year and how many people he ran over. Saquon Barkley has been that guy, even in Penn State. Rushed 1,800 yards, 31 touchdowns his senior year. Or had 31 touchdowns, more like it, his senior year. But Saquon Barkley, like Bo Jackson, completely messed up his leg due to sheer power. When he took that step and he got tackled, he hurt himself because his legs are too strong. He tore his ACL, his MCL, and his meniscus. You don't tear all three by just, okay, yes, you could tear it if a truck is hitting you, or if someone's deliberately like getting your knee, dropping it down, twisting it purposely to keep breaking all of them. He got tackled at Soldier Field by the Chicago Bears, and by him getting tackled, he tore his ACL, MCL, and his meniscus. 3 different things. He just completely tore off his knees. And that's not even including how he hurt himself the year before that when he hurt himself and got an ankle sprain. And after he came back from the ankle sprain, he got hurt the first week on the ankle sprain. On week 3 in the 2019 season. after that ankle sprain, never came back the same. Yes, he still finished with 1,000 yards, but that ankle sprain messed him up. So it went from ankle, then to his knee, and that was a high ankle sprain. High ankle sprains are usually worse than low ankle sprains. Low ankle sprains are 2 to 4 weeks. High ankle sprains are usually 4 to 8 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how. If it was Saquon Barkley, you just already know that this guy's trying to rush the process. He's going to try to do everything he can to rehab. This guy's a fighter, which I'll give him. He's definitely got a great mentality. The whole time he's just been saying, I want to be like Adrian Peterson. Adrian Peterson came back from that ACL injury, came back, rushed for over 2,000 yards in a season. One of the most historical seasons that he had on the Vikings. Rushed over 200 yards against the San Diego Chargers. Adrian Peterson was a man possessed after he tore his ACL, and he's still playing to this day. So Saquon Barkley is optimistic. This guy, fantasy football analyst or woman, is optimistic, but I'm not. Saquon Barkley's defense isn't stellar. 14th ranked fantasy defense. They're not that great at getting turnovers. They're not that great at pass defense. Their offense is barely even that good because they have Evan Ingram, who hasn't even panned out to be someone that we all thought he was going to be. He was a 16th ranked tight end when people drafted him as a tight end 5, or not even tight end 5, but like a ranked 1 through 5 tight end. He only had 1 touchdown last year. And then you have Darius Slayton, who, broke out after his rookie year, but 50 catches, 751 yards, 3 touchdowns, still not stellar. Sterling Shepard, who always gets hurt in and out of the season, 66 catches, 656 yards. He has the weapons, as I said, but it's all up to Daniel Jones. Are you believing that the guy who had 11 touchdowns and 16 turnovers will make you scared of a wide receiver 1? If this guy could barely get it to them, then what makes you think that Saquon Barkley's good? They're not going to stack the box again to either sack, rush, blitz, or tackle in the backfield Saquon Barkley, which is what they're clearly all right with doing. So I think like Saquon Barkley is a fine running back, and he could come back to, good standards, but with those Bo Jackson legs that are just preventing him from getting healthy because he's just going to keep putting too much power on him. He's just going to keep getting him stronger, and they're just going to be too strong for his own good because he's only 5'11". But he's 233. He's a stocky man. But I trust other people and would draft other people, and specifically running backs, over Saquon Barkley. Let's go over all the running backs I would draft over Saquon Barkley and feel like it would be a lot healthier and a lot better option to get. Aaron Jones finished as a fantasy running back 5, 1,100 yards. Even in a crowded backfield with Jamal Williams, who's now gone, by the way, and A.J. Dillon, who they're probably going to split more carries with, but I'm guessing more in the goal line, he still had 201 rushes and over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns. That's great production. He was still in a running back trio and still finished as a top 5 fantasy running back. Nothing changed with that offense at all. If anything, it got a little bit better because now they know what they have in Tonyan. Devontae Adams is going to take a lot of the grief. So now they're going to be able to run and do what Matt LaFleur used to do when he was the head coach on the Tennessee Titans. Run the ball. Aaron Jones, better than Saquon Barkley. What about Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Would you get him over Saquon Barkley? Yes, I would get him over Saquon Barkley. This is his second year in the league. I know he only had 803 yards, but as I said, Le'Veon Bell, they realized that was them trying to force something, and it didn't work out. They completely abandoned ship. They got rid of both their tackles. Didn't matter what they brought him to. They're looking to win another Super Bowl with what they have now. Clyde Edwards-Helaire got that vouch from Patrick Mahomes, which means he's going to be more acclimated into the offense because it's second year as well. The LSU product is for sure going to have a better year than Saquon Barkley, in my opinion. Would I draft him over Saquon Barkley? Yes. Would I draft Chris Carson over Saquon Barkley? If Saquon Barkley's still there and Chris Carson's there, and those are the best 2 running backs, you get Saquon Barkley. Chris Carson, if not, gets hurt just as much, if not more, than Saquon Barkley. I don't get him. He was the starting running back in a quote-unquote run-heavy offense with the quote-unquote happy Russell Wilson, and he still only rushed for 681 yards and 5 touchdowns, which made him the 19th ranked running back. Saquon's going to do a little better than 19th, but I'm just not thinking that Saquon's going to fall past the second round. No one's going to let him fall past the second round. They know what his potential is. He rushed for 1,800 yards and had 31 touchdowns his senior year at Penn State. This guy's a complete baller. He was the number 1 fantasy running back his rookie year coming out. I trust Saquon Barkley probably more than him. Josh Jacobs or Saquon Barkley. Josh Jacobs was the 8th ranked fantasy running back last year. 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns, still 12 touchdowns, but now he has to share that backfield with ex-Arizona running back Kenyon Drake, who also had a lot of the workload last year. He's a 16th ranked running back. I'd rather have both those guys than Saquon Barkley too, because you know what you're getting with the Raiders. They have one of the best lines. I mean, they've gotten rid of a bunch of them, but they're not going to get rid of those linemen like Rodney Hudson and Trent Williams just to get rid of them. They know that they're old and they have a lot of draft picks. They've been getting a lot of good linemen in the draft, and they could continue to because they still have more draft picks from trading Amari Cooper and other people. But Saquon Barkley, I would draft him. No, I wouldn't draft him over these guys. I was thinking about it for a second, but no. Jason Garrett is no better. Jason Garrett's offense is no better than the John Gruden offense. So in my opinion, I'm still fading Saquon Barkley. Kenyon Drake's I think Kenyon Drake's going to get a lot of love. And I feel like John Gruden just saw what Steven Stefanski did. So he just wants to do the 2 running back system where he's like, oh, we'll just beat you with our number 1, which is Darren Waller. And then we have some Willie Snead and Henry Ruggs on the other side as kind of the go guy just to, separate on the field. And then we'll beat you with Kenyon Drake as Kareem Hunt and Josh Jacobs as Nick Chubb. It's a good offense. Solid line. No problems there. I feel like I would still be comfortable with both those guys over Saquon Barkley. I would. I really would. David Montgomery, number 4 ranked fantasy running back last year. I would draft him definitely over Saquon Barkley. I know that Andy Dalton's their quarterback and they're going to stack the box, but Dave Montgomery is barely going into his 4th year. He's still got kind of fresh legs right now, and they're gonna be fine because he still rushed 1,070 yards and 8 touchdowns. If anything, the end of the year was better for him because he started to get things really going. He had 25 fantasy points, 26 fantasy points, 24 fantasy points, 28, 19, and 27. He didn't score under 19 fantasy points from week 12 to week 17, and all those are pretty much 1, 2, 3, 4 of those games were all divisional matchups. Guess who he's playing? The same people in the same division. He's still gonna mop them and torch them. They can't rely on Dalton. If anything, they're seeing what the Vikings are doing, and they're like, okay, maybe we're gonna milk Dave Montgomery like they do with Dalvin Cook, which is another guy I would draft over Saquon Barkley. The 2nd ranked running back, yes, was hurt the prior 2 years. Not including this year, but the 2 years before that, from 2018 and 2019. He was hurt 1 whole year, and then the other year he was hurt for 3 games, but still. Dalvin Cook rushed 312 times, 1,500 yards, and 16 touchdowns. Those are Derrick Henry-like numbers. Him and Derrick Henry, I don't even have to mention Derrick Henry's stats. Both of those guys I would gladly draft over Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, I'm telling you, those legs are strong, and it's not for his own good. Because he didn't tear his ACL, MCL, and meniscus all in one shot just because the guy gave him a wrestling move and twisted his knee up, or someone shot him in the back of the leg and his knee. It's because he literally got tackled and his legs are too strong for his own good. So when he came down, it wasn't like normal legs just breaking. It was awful. So all that pressure, all that Bo Jackson strength that he has is kind of to his downfall. That's why even the year before that, when he put too much pressure on his legs again, he got a high ankle sprain. High ankle sprains are worse than low ankle sprains. If he always gets recurring high ankle sprains, that means he's going to be out from 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how his rehab just goes, which you can never, ever really count on. An estimate will give you an estimate, but that's just the most it is. It's an estimate. Dalvin Cook on an offense that purely milks him. David Montgomery was on an offense who was purely milking him towards the end of the year. I mean, 32 carries. Goodness gracious, 23 and then 22 carries following the last games of the week. Tyreek Cohen's probably not going to come back being the same after he tore his ACL. So we'll see how the duo does. But Dave Montgomery I would draft over. Austin Eckler, a guy who was hurt from week 5 to week 11, but I would still draft over Saquon Barkley. Justin Herbert is his quarterback now. when he had Justin Herbert, he posted 23 fantasy points, 22 fantasy points, 10. He didn't post anything under 10 fantasy points from week 12 to week 17 with Justin Herbert as his quarterback. This guy's a stud. He did finish 25th ranked in running backs, but he catches the ball and runs the ball. And you know he runs the ball really efficiently because he runs 4 yards per carry. 4 yards per carry equals a first down. Just know that. 4 yards plus 4 yards plus 4 yards, 12 yards, first down every single time. Alvin Kamara, come on. The number 1 ranked running back in fantasy. Would I draft him over Saquon Barkley? Yes. Especially if they have Taysom Hill back there. He can't throw. So what is he going to do? Run the ball or pitch it to Alvin Kamara? Alvin Kamara, this guy is the ultimate receiver. I just don't get it. He has games where he has 13 catches, 139 yards, 7 catches, 83 yards, 7 catches, 44 yards, 9 catches, 96 yards. Just to name a few, Alvin Kamara is by far better than Saquon Barkley as a choice in this year's fantasy draft. James Robinson, the 7th ranked undrafted running back on the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's 7th ranked in fantasy last year, rushed for over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns, gave you performances of 20 fantasy points, 30 fantasy points, 26, 22, only rushed single-digit fantasy points twice throughout the whole year. Yes, twice throughout the whole year, and they were both 9 points. That just showed on a terrible Jacksonville Jaguars team. Now they're going to have Trevor Lawrence. They already have Marvin Jones. They're going to have DJ Chark. I would draft him over Saquon Barkley. Antonio Gibson, I would draft him over Saquon Barkley. Ron Rivera likes to run that 3-headed monster. I feel like Antonio Gibson in his rookie year had 170 rushes for 795 yards, 11 touchdowns. He gave you good numbers as the 13th ranked running back in fantasy, but next year's where he takes the next level. They're going to use him like they do with Christian McCaffrey. You already know that model because you saw what Ron Rivera did when he was the coach on the Panthers with Christian McCaffrey. I expect 230 rushes for over 1,000 yards and probably 8 to 11 touchdowns. Antonio Gibson gave you great games like one against the Dallas Cowboys where he rushed for 36, where he had 36 fantasy points and rushed for 3 touchdowns. Also on the Ravens, he rushed 2 touchdowns for 22 fantasy points. Antonio Gibson's going to be a stud on that Washington football team. Christian McCaffrey, the hurt guy. At least when he comes, he drops 27, 23, and 36 fantasy points. This guy's a beast. And that offense just knows how to milk it to him. And I trust the way that offense kind of operates more than the Jason Garrett, Joe Judge offense of Saquon Barkley. So I'd get Christian McCaffrey over Saquon. I literally named like 13 people. And that's not even including tight ends. Well, not tight ends, more like Travis Kelce. Receivers like Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, to name some of them. And quarterbacks that I'm more confident drafting over Saquon Barkley. The point is, if they draft him in the second round, let him be free. Just let someone else get him because I drafted him first and he's been hurt the whole year. And then the year before that, I drafted him first again. It didn't work out because he wasn't the same after that high ankle sprain. You could tell the Giants aren't looking like they're really going in the right direction. At least with that Eli Manning team, you could see something in it and a spark. This one, you don't see the same spark with Daniel Jones. Fade Saquon Barkley. I saw that post by Fantasy Football 101 on Instagram, and I just wanted to warn you guys, don't fall for the facade. I know Saquon, he has a number 1 receiver. His numbers are going to be better. No. We're here to make you champions at the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm not here to tell you lies. Championship talk is all we talk here. Thank you for listening to a great episode of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Remember to follow, like, and share us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I am so happy that I was able to host another great fantasy football episode, one step closer to us becoming champions in our fantasy football league next year. And no one will even know it. It'll come straight out of nowhere. I am glad to be your host. And thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.GSMC.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.